Buen día a todos y todas. Good day to everybody, and thank you so much for this opportunity to share with you some updates from Museum Define, from ICOM Define, and the new museum definition. Today, we're going to be sharing briefly with you some of our reflections on this, on the new definition in relation to its effect on ICOM as a whole, as well as thinking about it for you guys who are conservators. The new definition reads like this: a museum is a not-for-profit permanent institution in the service of society that researches, collects, conserves, interprets, and exhibits tangible and intangible heritage. Open to the public, accessible, and inclusive, museums foster diversity and sustainability. They operate and communicate ethically, professionally, and with the participation of communities, offering varied experiences for education, enjoyment, reflection, and knowledge sharing.
So hello, everyone. I would like to start this by saying to you that this definition also gives us a lot of opportunities in terms of topics of discussion. And one of them is really to think about what does the museum mean to each of us, especially professionally in our professional lives today. We like to bring you this image, which is a very traditional representation of what a museum meant in the 19th century, but I would say that this is the best representation of museums that we have, and we had up until the middle of the 20th century when ICOM was conceiving its first versions of museums definition. So back then, in the 20th century, the museum definition never caused so much debate as it did in this century, because most people had this representation, and this is an image that we use a lot in classes when we're talking about the history of museums, which is basically a building built based on a collection with a very exclusive audience. So it was not very difficult to define what museums were back then. But in the 21st century, and we can move now to the next image, we have a much more bigger range of museums, and the museum phenomenon has really diversified. Here, this is a community museum in Rio de Janeiro, Brazil, where we have the community actually creating a museum in their own terms. This is Museum of Removals in Vila Autódromo in Rio de Janeiro, where a community was almost removed by the state in order for the gentrification of a specific part of the city. And as a result of that, they have created a museum as part of their resistance. So this is a museum based on activism, not really based on a collection, even though this community now has some collections, such as the photographs that you can see in this image. But basically, the main focus of the museum is really talking to the community and talking to other communities about the risks of removals in the region. So it's very much what we try to demonstrate here is how harder it is today to define what a museum is. So that was the task that we had at hand when we started this process in 2020. And as you know, a new museum definition, the one that was just presented to you again here, was approved last year by ICOM. But we wanted to show you a little bit of how we got there.
So before we even go into the process itself of having come to a new museum definition, we wanted to run briefly through what are the reasons why we have a museum definition, especially in the 21st century, when everything seems like there's multiple definitions for many things and everybody accepts the openness of much of this. So how do we come to a definition, as Bruno said, in a world where there's so many different kinds of museums in very different social contexts with very different mission statements at hand. But the reasons we do need a museum definition definitely range from the internal within ICOM itself. This is ICOM's museum definition, and it's the one that's most widely used around the world. And it's used also within ICOM as a tool to define or determine institutional partnership and to also admit its members.
Yeah, but also externally, if we consider the effects of the museum definition much beyond the membership of ICOM, this definition serves several countries as a parameter to create rules and establish policies for the museum field. So many countries have legislations that are actually reflecting this definition, or in the case of some countries where the definition, exactly as ICOM has in its statutes, is used to constitute law.
Economically speaking as well, the museum definition is operational because it allows for states and different funding sources to allocate the resources for those who do the work of preserving and transmitting heritage and this claim over the right for memory. So as we define how we fund this work that we do, the definition itself is hugely important.
Instrumentally, even the concepts and terms in the museum definition determine the core concepts and museum functions that will be studied and used for the training of museum professionals. So in many ways, this definition shaped our profession, and we're going to be talking a little bit more about that in the end.
And lastly, of course, we know that the museum definition serves as the basis for ICOM's Code of Ethics. It is integrated into ICOM's Code of Ethics, as well as the statutes of ICOM itself. And this, in turn, influences the conduct of museum professionals globally. So this ethical approach to how we do our work is in large part informed by the definition. So we're not going to go into in depth in how we came to the new museum definition that was approved in 2022, but we did want to let everybody know and make sure that everybody's fully aware that the definition itself was not drafted by a group of professionals, a small group of professionals sitting around a table, but rather it was an 18-month-long process that followed a very strict methodology based on terms and concepts that were provided by the committees themselves, evaluated by the committees themselves, and then the process of drafting the definition went through different consultation processes with committees from all over the world. So we are talking about a very democratic process that took place to come to the final definition, which was the one that we presented to you earlier.
This process really considered many points of view. We included at least 86 countries and several international committees of ICOM. And obviously, as a result of the 4 rounds of consultations that we had before actually approving or proposing a definition for approval, we had a lot of data. And this slide shows a little bit of how complex these data were and how we considered them. Here they are divided by the 7 dimensions that we considered that were constructed based on qualitative data, and also we considered within each of these dimensions the quantitative data that we received. That's how we started drafting the definition that we have today.
And definitely you can see how complex it is from this sheer image that shows the many terms that we are working with, the many ways in which those terms can be utilized in a definition. So now that we've let you know very quickly how we got here, what the definition is, we wanted to let you know as well some of what we're working on currently within the committee that is ICOM Define. So most importantly, we're supporting committees in the communication, the implementation, and the translation of the museum definition. This is work that's ongoing. Things like this specific webinar or recording of a video that we're sharing with you, but also translation is in place at present. So around the world, we're receiving already translations into many different languages, including indigenous languages. So this is some of the work that we're doing at present.
Yeah, and this work also gives us the opportunity to do something that we really look forward to doing this next mandate, which is to observe how museum practice actually respond to this definition or support the definition or even contradict the definition in some points. So for instance, we are looking into how the different countries and committees can inform us about museum practice and specific policies, for instance, that are being constructed based on the definition. We already have several committees that are already reporting things that are being done in terms of national legislation or public policies for museums and the cultural sector that are considering the definition. And one of the things that is one of our questions to work with these changes that we see today, for instance, is how does the definition affect the professional fields that serve museums and the heritage sector in general? We're really trying to see how this definition is not only reflecting what the professional life of museum professionals and heritage professionals is today, but also how it can contribute to professionals in general. So that's why we would like to end this presentation by bringing to your attention this notion, the second sentence that is actually very important for us in this definition, which states that museums operate and communicate ethically, professionally, and with the participation of communities. We know that the conservation sector has a lot of professional responsibilities. You have a lot of ethical issues to deal with. You have ethical codes and rules that you obey. But it's also important to notice, exactly for this reason, that the definition for the first time is approaching ethically as one of the most important elements of museum work. So talking about work and talking about the professional performance in the museum sector today, we do have to consider ethical issues. And in this matter, we should also call attention to the fact that ICOM today is revising its code of ethics for museum professionals. And one of the elements that is being considered is the role of communities, and how do we consider community perceptions of reality and of heritage in our own practices. This is something that for me, for us in general, it's very important and present in this definition, which is how the work of the museum professional has become much more horizontal and much more open to dialogue, rather than it's based on expertise and technique.
But of course, that expertise and technique is necessary for us to make sure that we're dealing with the heritage in a professional manner. Now, one of the things that's important to point out about the term professionally, the way that it is used within the definition, is that it doesn't require that everybody be professional in the sense of having a degree from a university that specifically enables them to do this practice. Why is this the case? Because we know many countries don't even offer the opportunity to study. And in the case we're contemplating conservation here. So to become professional conservators with a degree, but one of the things that is absolutely essential to point out is that inevitably we must work in a professional manner, right? Professionally as an adverb. And in this case, we're also taking into consideration kaitiakitanga, which is this concept that was put forth by ICOM Aitoria New Zealand when they explained to us in the qualitative data that what does that mean? What does this term mean? It's caring for collections. It's the practice of being a caregiver or guardian, recognizing the living nature of taonga, which is ancestral treasures, the ancestral treasures. So what is the point here that we want to make sure to bring out is this notion that everybody needs to work professionally. They should abide by those ethics that are put forth, but that at the same time, it's very evident that it's not always a possibility to have title holding people taking care of all of our collections and all of our ancestral treasures or current day treasures.
In this sense, the professional and the role of the professional in the museum also extends to the communities when we state that all museums should work with the participation of communities. This is a very important point because we make this definition much more horizontal and much more open to the sharing of knowledge and to dialoguing with different communities. Here, for example, we have this case of the Colombian Museum of Memory, where they have developed participatory workshops with LGBTIQ victims of the country armed conflict, which helped to a more inclusive perception over documenting the crisis, the local crisis. So many museums are doing that, and we are talking about major institutions, even ethnographic museums and European museums, not only museums in the global South, are actually recurring to community work as a form of expertise, which means that we do need to extend our idea of what conservating means, what collecting means, and what researching or even communicating and exhibiting means in the environment of the museum. Communicating and exhibiting means in the...
So with that, we thank you so very much for your attention. I apologize for my video not working right now, but we also wanted to draw your attention to an article that was just recently published in the Museum International, in which Bruno and myself go into more depth into not only the flexible nature of all the terms that are within the definition, but giving some orientation around the meaning things that we received during the qualitative data, understand what each one of the terms are. So if you're interested in this, please do look for that article so you can go into more depth into each one of the terms that we only had a chance to do a few of them. Thank you so much for your attention. Thank you so much, Kate Seymour, for the invitation to participate in your conference today. And please do not hesitate to reach out to us with any other comments that you might have regarding this matter. You can reach us at training@icom.museum. Bruno,
Thank you.
Thank you
very
bye?
much. And we hope to stay in dialogue.
Thank you very much.